friend. It's Andra Zaharia, and I'm grateful you chose to be my partner in cyber empathy today. Journey with me through the lives and minds of people who prioritize connection, curiosity, and kindness in everything they do. Let's find out together how empathy cultivates hope, how it builds resilience, and helps us see how our actions influence others. It's time to unlearn stereotypes and see beyond technology to discover what truly makes our world safer. I'll help you carry over these insights and examples into your everyday practice. Promise. Let's go exploring, shall we? The people who know today's guest have just absolutely wonderful remarks about him. That's because Pete Herzog is one of the most interesting people in cybersecurity. And not just interesting, but he's a deep thinker. He is an avid researcher. He's a great human. And he's a very, very generous contributor. And honestly, for me, he's a role model for what you can achieve in this field if you commit to it, if you put all of yourself into it, and if you let your curiosity drive you through the various stages of your life. Some people call him a visionary, and some people call him unconventional, and those two things go so well together because Pete is a brilliant security professional and one of the few scientists in this space in the sense of his methodic approach to everything. We talked about neurohacking and how he actually created music that helps your brain either go to sleep or achieve things in much faster and with more efficiency than you would have expected. And this is just a side project for Pete because his body of work is absolutely monumental, from creating standardized methodology for testing open source security to elaborating principles of trust that help you define whether a computer system is trustworthy or not, to also creating hacking lessons for teenagers. He's just gone across the board to create valuable resources that have influenced other people's lives and personal and professional trajectories. It has been such a privilege to talk to him, and I promise you there will be a part 2 of this conversation. But until then, I hope you enjoy his fascinating stories, and I hope that you follow his work and dive into the resources he's created because they are truly exceptional. It's a privilege to have you on the Cyber Empathy podcast. It's a privilege to be able to find out more about your work. Not that there's not so much about it online, but I want to help more people discover it and enjoy it and draw inspiration from it. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's totally my privilege to be here. You've built quite a reputation for yourself, and I'd be foolish not to say yes. So thank you.
I'm really, truly humbled by that, especially because I feel like what we see from your work is kind of the tip of the iceberg. And I was hoping that today we get a chance to look at some of the things that are down there under the surface. And one of the things that jumped out of me, while I was trying to put together like the things that I want to ask you is something that someone wrote about you on LinkedIn. And they said that Pete is a humble giant in the cybersecurity space, and I felt that is such a fitting description for all of your work. So I wanted to start with a passion project of yours that will give us like an unsuspecting, kind of surprising, very interesting intro to this conversation, which is your music-related project, which is invisibles.cat. So tell me a bit about that. How did you end up making music for hackers?
So I would say it was probably around 2009 we started playing in neurohacking. It was more about how can you hack the brain. It has to go back even further. So back in when I first started professionally, I would say like 94, 93, 94, I was really into this zine that you had to like order called Pills A Go-Go. and they would hack medicine, over-the-counter medicines, into things that they wanted, different chemicals, different drugs, things like that. And then, of course, eventually the Drug Enforcement Agency shut them down, and everybody on the subscription list received a subpoena for whatever, and we were on the list to, if we ever showed up in Oregon, we would be arrested or something. It was really dumb, but I liked it. I liked the fact that they were trying things, they were hacking things, and they were testing on themselves. And come years later, I'm at a place where we're kind of established, and we're understanding more and more about security and about looking into social engineering and why do people fall for it. And so all of this kind of comes together with all of our research. I was fascinated with the idea of hacking the brain, this whole neurohacking thing. And we did it like we do everything else. You study how it works to the best of your ability, and you look into it. And so my wife is a hell of a researcher. She deep dives into everything she wants to do. When somebody had a brain scan because they had headaches, she learned how to read a MRI from brains and knew what she was looking at, because actually all the information is online. You just have to find it and read it. I'm talking actual studies, but medical textbooks, things like that. I'm not talking, Facebook. I'm talking actual learning how to do things. And so she's somebody that helps me a lot in doing these things. And we deep dive into this, and we said, okay. And so the first thing I think we built was a transcranial direct current stimulation device. And these are things that basically put a small voltage through certain sections of your brain, whether it's positive or negative, has certain effects. I mean, when we first started in 2009, there were some websites where people were talking about it or chatting about it, but it wasn't very big. Now you're going to find thousands, if not tens of thousands of articles about it. Different sections of brains have been thoroughly mapped, different voltages, all this stuff. And that didn't exist. And we were just really interested because it seemed like a type of magic, right? So you're putting in a little bit of voltage and you're getting some sort of benefit out of it. And so first ones we did were like this headband that would hold these metal diodes in place. But of course, you need to use salt water in order for it to get to your skin, which then, of course, burns your skin. And so when I first started doing this, and some of the other hackers, they would have these scars on their heads from where the metal would burn into them. And it wasn't until much later that we actually figured out, a better system. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was, so I had this partner that we worked with, and he was interested in getting better at tennis. And he knew that TDCS had a way of helping you learn physical skills faster. And it was being used by the military and things like that, like for sharpshooters, and how do you learn these things? So he wanted to be able to wear TDCS you wear it for up to 30 minutes. And then you get about 3 hours of learning time off of it, enhanced learning time. So you could supposedly, what would take months of learning, he could get down in days, if not weeks. We ended up building it into, this is the first prototype. I still have it here. It's a ball cap, and inside it has tin plates. And these, well, this one's just tin, you can see, but this is, the sponges for your kitchen sink, because they're easily removable and throw away, right? So you would soak these in salt water, and there's Velcro throughout the inside of the hat, and you could place the things where you wanted it in a general way. Now, of course, we've gotten much more specific and much more smaller, and so while you're wearing it, while it's on, you have a green light. And the moment there's connectivity, you would get a red light. And of course, tin does not corrode from the salt water, but the sponges do. Anyway, so we started playing with it and doing a lot. And I started using it for writing articles. And I probably burned out my brain, but I would just really just focus and get an article done in 2 hours, what used to take me days. And I just started cranking out articles for things. And we started really getting into this. I really liked the idea. And at some point, we came across stuff with sound. Then binaural beats became a thing. And there's a few others like the God sound. So there's a lot of crap science about it. So you kind of have to dig through it and try to find out what it is. So the first problem happened was COVID. Everybody was working from home. I had kids at home. And so it was difficult to focus. It was difficult to get work done. So I looked into what we could do. And of course, there were sounds and things you could put together for focus, but they actually made me dizzy over time because it's just static, right? So it's different kinds of static at different frequencies. And they all have names like pink noise, brown noise. And so we started playing it. I was like, man, it'd be better if it was actually music, if it sounded like something. So again, deep dive into what sounds, what things bring focus, trying to look into what makes somebody focus something. And I was talking to this musician I knew who was currently out of work because they couldn't tour because of COVID. He's a pretty big name band here in Spain. It's called Mewt. And I talked to them, and he was the main singer, lead singer, and writer. And so he agreed that I would make a template for what the sounds have to fit and what we needed exactly. And he would try to produce music, that fit within that template. It was kind of a clunky way of doing it, but we learned over time how to do it better and better. And he ended up making a bunch of songs. Some of them didn't make it. We're looking to, they were the wrong type. And then we would sort of switch them over. We did some motivation music, or what we called morning coffee music. It just kind of gives you a feel good jolt in the morning. And we played around with that. But in the end, we released an album, which we ended up putting on Spotify and Amazon Music and a couple of others, which is called Logical Flight. Logical Flight is just music that makes you focus. And really, it starves your brain of dopamine, is the idea, so that the only reward you get is the work you do. That was the theory. We were trying, the hypothesis or whatever. But it worked really well. We tested it and we gave it out to a lot of people who tried it on everything from cleaning the house to trying to do work. But it was also supposed to block out human voice sounds as well. So there was a lot to it. I think it ended up working really well. I still use it all the time. As a matter of fact, I was fixing a ceiling this weekend and I played it because it's work I hated and you're just reaching over your head the whole time. And so like I was played it just to get, and it worked. It plays. You're supposed to zone out the music completely, which happens. And then you just think about the work and then you get it done. And I actually was able to accomplish it. Then we kind of left it out there and I didn't really market it. I dropped the ball because I'm really great at making things and I'm really bad at selling things. So I just kind of left it out there. We made a website. Well, actually, my wife made the website. And now my oldest daughter's also working for us and doing designs and things. But most of the stuff was done by Xavi of Mewt as far as the music goes. I just made the template and the research. COVID sort of got swept under the rug and people started touring again and things happened. And so their band started going well again and things were happening. So he did his thing, we did ours. And then I still had everything sitting there. So the next problem came, which was the anxiety that everybody had. There was the insomnia issues and all that. So we're like, well, let's try to make music for people to fall asleep. And again, it was a deep dive into research and how people don't want to be bored to sleep. So the whole classical music thing doesn't really work unless you like classical music. And if you do, then you're going to pay attention to the music and not fall asleep. There's a lot of things that are happening there. And so we started looking into what tones and frequencies and beats and natural sounds. And so it's really a lot of information you have to collect and then sort of build into a template. And I gave it to, we had hired a new guy for threat hunting, who used to be a heavy metal guitarist and music producer. So I said to him, hey, can you do something with this sounds? Play this for me, see what this sounds like. And he sent me a few audios back. I was listening to it and I thought, this sounds like Rammstein. This is like some sort of electronic heavy metal. So I went back to him. I said, do you think we can make heavy metal sleep music? And he said, absolutely not. It's the stupidest thing. It doesn't make sense. And I said, listen to those tones again and tell me that doesn't sound like metal to you. And he says, it does. But I said, well, we have the template. I made out the template and very strict. And he had to do a lot of hacking around some of the sounds because some of the guitars, some of the drums don't fit. They're too high. So you have to keep tones low. You have to keep the beat at a slowness. But it's complicated because you have to distract people first. So the idea is the music distracts within the first 30 seconds, gets your mind off, because most people can't sleep because their minds are too busy. So it distracts them, and then it gets simpler as the song goes on. And some of the songs are anywhere from 5 to 8 minutes, but they get simpler. They get less complicated, but in a way that sort of lulls your brain and lets you then fall asleep. So we finally got 5 of the 7. We wanted 7 songs. And we ended up making, like, his name's David, by the way. He made, I don't know, maybe 12 or 14. That's just what he told me about. So he sends me 5 that he finished and polished and everything in the end. And because we always send them back and forth, and I say no to this or that or change this. He sends me 5, and I get them at night, and I'm just before bed. I'm laying in bed there. My wife and I are just laying there. And I was like, he sent me the songs. So I started playing the song on my phone, and we're listening to it. He sent 2 versions, headphone and room, because it matters on whether or not, if you're using binaural and things like that. So anyways, space matters. And I'm listening to it, trying to just listen to it, And I turn to my wife and say, what do you think? And she's out. And so I said to her the next day, I said, tell me you were just really tired or was it the music? Because she was one of the bigger critics of it, because it's weird. I have to admit, it sounds weird. But she says she doesn't know. She was listening to music and then she just fell asleep. So who knows? We're going to do a lot more tests with it. Like I said, I have 5 songs. Happy to let other people try it out. And once I have all 7, they're going to be on Spotify or Amazon Music or whatever.
That is absolutely fascinating because of many of the aspects, because it ties hacking. Again, it kind of superimposes hacking on anything that we do because it's the same thought process of breaking down things, of looking into them, on reconnecting them in ways that are surprising and that get the sounds that make up music to do something else entirely that they usually do, which is the essence of hacking itself. And I was wondering if this story actually connects to the fact that you have a bachelor in arts, but you've spent your entire life in cybersecurity, which seems to many people outside the industry, and even perhaps to some many people in the industry, it still feels like an antagonistic relationship to kind of build your work on. But what's the connection there? It feels like music kind of bridged these 2 experiences.
So back when I went to university, they wouldn't allow me to take computer science because my math grades weren't good enough. Because remember, everything was done on a mainframe and personal computers. When I went into school, there wasn't much, yeah. So most of the programming was still done on mainframes for the most part. And that's what we had at the university. So they basically said no to me. And I didn't know what to do. And so I sort of stumbled through university. You have 2 years in America to sort of take your core classes, and then you need to pick a major before the end of that. I did work in the computer lab, which was interesting because professors would come to me with this locked software, and I would hack it on the disk and basically crack the software for them so they could use it for their class, which caused its own trouble sometimes. But it was interesting. And then I had access to Macs came out and PageMaker, and we were cracking software and making fake IDs. So I was heavily involved in computers. I still liked computers. I just couldn't study it. And then I was mixing class, like I was looking into advertising and journalism. And so I was taking all sorts of writing things and interested in English because maybe I'd go to law school, or I wasn't sure, I stumbled into the library one night while the cleaners were there. So the computer lab was in the basement of the library, and there was also a cigarette machine, the old style where you pull the handle, chunk chunk, and the cigarettes fall. So you put in the money, chunk chunk, and I had figured out how to hack those machines to get cigarettes out, but I didn't smoke, so I didn't care. So I would just pull out cigarettes to sell or trade. And in this case, the cleaners came down, and I gave them packs of cigarettes if they would let me go in the library, follow them into the library, which was after hours. So I could go behind the desks and look at all the books that the professors put away because they have the answers in. So I went there, and lo and behold, I find this terminal. There's these 2 terminals there. Of course, there's no logins, no passwords, nothing. I get on, and I'm fascinated. I have no idea what I'm looking at. This blinking thing. I mean, here I knew PCs and everything, and I had no idea what I was looking at. And they had books there, so I started learning about Telnet, FTP, all this kind of basic stuff, which sounds ridiculous now, right? But I started playing around, and I was like, oh my God, I'm connected to a computer in Sweden, or I'm connected to Michigan or whatever. And I think it was the time when ARPANET was transitioning to what is known as Internet now. And I asked then, how can I get an account? Because there was a thing called email, and I could get in, but I couldn't have people send me messages, which I wanted to do for whatever reason. And they said, no, to get on this network, you have to be a science researcher. And then somebody else from the back said, or a librarian. So I thought, I'll just be a librarian. And that's where my focus was. And I spent all this time with these terminals. And so when I graduated, it was funny because I went out to California with my best friend. He got a job at Intel as an engineer, and he just wanted somebody to help him set up the apartment and everything while he started work. He couldn't do things, couldn't even set up a bank account. We kind of looked alike. So I would take his ID and set him up with stuff, and he paid the bills. We did this, and he would come back and tell me all about these new chips they're building. And then there was an advertisement for a job from the CDC. They were in the area in Sacramento, and they were hiring for people to edit data and send it back to Atlanta. And so I went for the interview, and one of the things that I could do was work with computers. I knew how to troubleshoot them, and I knew how to send things via FTP. That got me the first job doing that, which then led to me moving to Atlanta and working there full time at some point, which then led to medical school, which then I dropped out of and led to because more internet stuff. And I was in charge of the medical lab where they had the computer lab where they were teaching medical computing. And so all this sort of just grew, and security was part of it. I mean, security was always part of my life. I had security guard jobs. And when I was in college, I was beer stings, which is they take a kid who's under 21 and drive him around who tries to buy beer. And if, of course, they sell you beer, they get arrested or whatever. But I never had the heart. I'd social engineer them. They would sell me the beer, and I'd be like, no, they're outside. Never do this again. It's not like we were wired or anything. I said, take it away from me and send me out. Now, take it, and then, but yeah, so I was really into the whole security, and like, I guess beer stings were sort of pen testing, and this was just sort of all evolved along with growing up with networks and being part of it. And I was talking about this the other day. I think I have, in those early days, I actually wrote an article that got accepted by 2600 magazine on hacking netware. This had just a long history, and that's why, I mean, security is just a thing, and computing is, well, I wouldn't say computing, more networks. So it all sort of fit together, and I was good at technology and hacking. And that's sort of where this came from.
We still get lucky that you were so passionate as to overcome all of these obstacles and all of these absurd limitations that sometimes get young people to be disengaged with school. Is just one of those things that, let's say, not the arbitrary, but what seems arbitrary limitations that get people to fall out of love with things that they are truly passionate about. But fortunately, you are not one of those people.
Not everything was out of good intentions, right? So, I mean, I was heavily bullied in high school, to the point that when I was in college, I started kickboxing. And once I was out, I joined a fight club. Literally, I was part of fight clubs. And then, but hacking gave me power. I mean, I didn't know that eventually all of our lives would be online and it would give me that much power, right? Like now it's an insane amount of power. But back then it was just enough to kick them off of mail servers and ruin their day on AOL. And if you go back far enough, and wipe out their directories. And so, like, it gave me a power I didn't have. When you're young and you feel very powerless, it allowed me to have this kind of revenge if I wanted to. Again, it wasn't always like that. It's not like I was seeking out people from my past. It was more, if somebody dealt with me in a negative way at the present time, then I would be able to do something back. So again, it was a mix of things, right? I don't want people to think that I just was all roses in my life. I mean, I had pain, and hacking was something that allowed me to have power when I had none over a lot of things, a lot of injustices. I think that's sort of why, I mean, we still do a lot of free work for people who suffer injustice all the time. I mean, revenge porn, I probably at least twice a month, we hear from somebody where they want it taken down or something dealt with. So there's always trouble.
There is, but in my opinion, I think that there are a lot of people who share similar backgrounds, who felt not seen, who felt on the outside of social groups, and they found their people online in groups of hackers in the beginning of what now became a major commercial industry, but was for such a long time something very obscure for only the initiated, and so on and so forth. There are true bonds, and there's a lot of camaraderie because people share these values. But at the end of the day, this desire for justice and for fairness and for equality have transformed into people who are molding and influencing how security evolves and how security influences many of the other decisions that shape technology and ended up shaping society at large, which I think is powerful. So those idealistic objectives that were born from not being seen, from just being on the other side of so much unfairness and so much pain in many cases, like Jason Street shared in a previous conversation. It's things like these that eventually turned into something good and something powerful, and then this desire to give back. Because if you don't know what those experiences are, it's hard for you to understand why it's so important to help these people overcome their own issues, whether it's revenge porn, like you mentioned, whether it's teens getting bullied online, and whether it's disinformation and all of the other things. So our difficult experiences make us empathetic if we choose that level of, let's say, self-development, if we choose to integrate these experiences instead of rejecting them and trying to just shove them somewhere really deep and dark and get away from them. So I really appreciate you sharing all of these things so openly.
We ended up doing a program called Hacker High School. So in about 2003, we start this thing for teenagers, teaching cybersecurity teenagers, which was a huge flop up until about 2014 because kids didn't have cell phones, they didn't have mobile. So nobody thought, why do they need to know cyber safety, cybersecurity? Like the word hacking, Hacker High School was such a negative term. Schools didn't want to touch it. So we basically had some religious schools and homeschooling and military schools. They were using it, but it was slowly growing. About 2014, it really took off. And we started in 2003. We also built the very first cyber range ever for anything for these kids to test on and practice. So we ended up doing a lot of things along with La Salle University in Barcelona. So my wife and I put together this huge thing. We started making all these lessons. And the problem is that you couldn't have kids under 18 sign a contract that they're going to be ethical, right? That they're going to do the right thing. It's absolutely ridiculous that people try to make them sign a contract. But that is an issue, right? How do we keep them on the straight and narrow? How do we teach them to be powerful enough? And we found two things. One was we teach them to be powerful enough to know how to catch people so that they know they can be caught if they do something wrong. So you teach them to understand how to catch people before you teach them how to do bad things so that they know what they're looking for, right? So they know how somebody would catch them. And of course, that's just a starting point. And the other thing we do is we teach empathy. All the lessons, we write in a lot of stories because kids learn best through narrative. So we have a lot of stories in there. And those stories have a lot of empathy about family, about understanding what other people are going through when they get hacked, what they feel, cyberbullying. And so that you see it through the eyes of the character and you feel what they feel when they go through stuff. I think overall that's been so much more powerful than having them sign a contract that says they'd be ethical, that they just understand what others are going through. Now, so Hacker High School's been growing and growing. I think we're up to 15 or 16 lessons now. We've had sponsorships from Microsoft and IBM. I mean, it's a great program. I think we get about 300,000 downloads a month of the lessons. So it does well. We're coming out with some classes, and now we're mixing it with esports so that there's a game element to it. So there's they play video games which reinforce the skills that they learn. But empathy made a huge difference in how it got accepted by schools. That and the fact that the students teach themselves, right? So the lessons are written to teach yourself and not for them to try to get learning from a proctor or a teacher. Part of the reason too is because teachers just can't. They just don't have the time.
And plus, it gives them a lot more independence, agency, and like you said, self-confidence that that's something they can do, because this learning how to learn, I feel, is the most important contribution that school can have in our lives. Because when we know how to learn, we can do it by ourselves our entire lifetime. And hopefully we'll be doing this because it benefits our health and helps us adjust to life and society and everything else in the meanwhile. And speaking of things that you created that actually help you do things yourself, you are the co-creator of a hugely important standard for security testing and analysis, the open source security testing methodology manual, which has a catchy acronym that you remember. One of the core tenets in there is that trusting everyone is insecure, but trusting no one is inefficient. And I thought you could share just a few key things of what this means, especially for people who hear about, the zero trust model everywhere, but we need to understand the nuances of it, because it feels another one of those binary things that either pushes you into an all or nothing situation. And there's a lot more to that. Nuance helps us understand things better, and I feel also assimilate them in a more efficient way.
Well, zero trust has become this buzzword, right? And I think they're sort of now coming around to actually giving it some sort of meat behind it. It was just a buzzword that sounded good. It was completely impractical. And now they're sort of trying to define it, but there's no real industry standard behind it. I think people are just jumping on the bandwagon. When we worked with trust, actually it was an EU project we were part of, a really big one on building a open trusted computing system. And so in 3.5 years, we had to build trust metrics. So we did a huge deep dive in how do you measure trust to know you have a trustworthy computing system. Yeah, we ended up defining, I think, 10 properties of trust. And was it 10? I don't remember at the time. But yeah, and now we're at 15 and we're learning more all the time. But the idea here is that there's properties of trust that say, okay, if you complete all of these things, then you have something completely trustworthy. And you can rate them from 0 to 100%. Or, you can get better with your quantifications on how you do it. We've done a lot of work on that. But the idea here is that trust is one of those things that people just do badly overall. It is a vulnerability. It gives access, just like a door. You're giving. So what's the difference between me walking in or you letting me in? It's the same thing. I get in. One is abused trust, and the other is me breaking in. It's so bad, which is why phishing and ransomware is so bad, because humans suck at trust. They just do. And when we look at the trust properties, one of the interesting things we found was that you can manipulate somebody by just breaking or lying on one trust property. If I fulfill one trust property for you in a way that you believe it, out of 15, that might be enough for you to go. Now, cynical people, you would think, need a lot more, but they actually only need 3. And again, I don't have to be truthful. I just have to make you think I'm telling the truth about those 3. It's something that you can really use to manipulate people. My God, what a horror I would have been if I knew this stuff when I was a teenager. It's scary effective, but it allows us to measure trust. It allows us to count things and understand. And this is where we come back to it, is that trust is one of those things that is necessary. The whole human experience is based around trust, and trusting people only if they trust you. There's so many anecdotes in every culture about who you can trust and when you can trust them and what they look like and what physical attributes make somebody more trustworthy. I mean, it's pretty brutal. And of course, the fact that you can manipulate and lie over them, and you can do some neurohacks to make people think they feel one way or the other. And that's a whole other conversation that I think we need another interview, another talk to go over, because it's absolutely fascinating, the whole trust thing, that zero trust doesn't even come close to touching. Nowhere near. It's such a complicated, complex matter. It's as complex, if not more complex, than us trying to design security systems, because here you're designing security systems for human beings who are resilient to being safe. They just want to get the job done. You ask anybody, you would rather be fired for breaking security protocols in your company and having to go to the next company and say, they fired me because I hit reply all on an email or whatever breaks. I loaned a coworker my badge, whatever. They would rather do that than get fired for sucking at their job. So they're always going to go around security measures to do their job, especially if they can do it better. So, trust is such a complicated subject. So we used to ask this question that said, if you could take a pill that would make you trust everyone, because trust is a good thing. If you could take a pill that would make you trust everyone, would you take it? And of course, everybody would say, no, it's of course not. And we had one guy who said, I would if everyone else had to take it too. And I find that just a wonderful statement overall,
It is. It truly is.
Because it would be nice. That's a utopia if you could actually trust people.
It will alleviate so much tension and break down so many barriers. But until that happens, we're going to feed off all of these great resources that you've given us and all of these wildly inspiring and interesting stories that you've shared today. And I'm sorry we have to wrap up this conversation, but if you're ever up for it, I would love to do a deep dive on trust and how just the inner workings of that and what that means and how it gets reflected into technology behaviors and our choices.
I think people are dying to hear that, actually. I think it needs to be done. So send me an invite of when you want to do the next one. We'll go into part 2 about trust.
Promise. Thank you so much for everything, Pete. This has been absolutely wonderful.
No, thank you.
Thank you for everything that you do. You're one of the best people.
Thank you. Thank you. And you're a shooting star.
Hey, congrats! You made it until the end of this episode. Thanks so much for listening. And if you want to get the show notes and see the transcript and get other resources, head on over to cyberempathy.org. You'll find all of the episodes there and resources to help you have a more comfortable relationship with technology and security. Also, if you want to contact me, all my details are on there. And I'll see you soon. Bye!